council meeting, which is to hear submissions on a range of fees and charges and other items, development contributions policy and schedule fees and charges. So I will just open with karakia, whakatauki tahu, ki te uru, whakatauki tahu, ki te tonga, kia makina kina ki ita, kia matara tara ki tai, e he aki, an ate atakura, he tio, he huka, he hohu, ti he Māori ora. So I haven't received any apologies. So most people are here either online or in attendance. But we have received no apologies in any event. There's no public forum this evening. Any declarations of interest that anyone needs to make? Councillor Kinnaman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My wife will be submitted today, and also I have a interest in a mooring Mapua channel, and that I will remove myself from deliberations.
On those topics? Well, I mean, you could remove yourself from deliberations entirely, should you wish to. But I suspect you probably only want to remove yourself from those particular topics. So we'll note that. Thank you, Councillor Kinnaman. Right, first up, I'll just go across to Briley to introduce the submissions in relation to development and contributions policy. Right.
Thank you. Good morning to the Chair. So development contributions policy, we received 13 submissions and we're going to hear from at least half of them today. Just noting that one submission is on the behalf of two organisations who are both going to speak today. And just let me know at the end of the session of development contribution speakers if there's any additional matters to cover in the deliberations reports. Otherwise, I'll take it as read. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Briley. So first up, so we'll just go through the schedule. It's been circulated to councillors, and so submitters, you've got 5 minutes. I will give you the little at about 4.5. So if you want to leave any time for questions, try and do so within the 5 minutes. Otherwise, we'll be somewhat constrained in terms of question time. So the submissions will have all been circulated. They will have been read by councillors. So if rather than read it all out, if you have specific areas of emphasis or particular things you want to council to focus on, then perhaps highlight those. But it is really over to you how you want to utilise that 5 minutes. So we will start off firstly with Tim Cook. Welcome, Tim.
Good morning, Tim, councillors. Okay, a bit of background. My name's Tim Cook, as you know. I grew up in Richmond. I lived away for many years, been a resident since 2019. I'm a ratepayer. I work from home for a company based outside of Nelson at the moment. I have an understanding of the national policy statements, future development strategies in Tier 1, 2 and 3 councils. I'm more familiar with district plans, RMA consenting processes and engineering requirements for urban development. So I have an interest in Richmond on the Rise. I followed the history of this through the local newspapers, Newsline and Shape Tasman. I've attended drop-ins that have happened. One of the early ones held down on Queen Street, more recently here in the council chambers. I'm really impressed with what Jeremy and his team have put together. It's excellent material. My initial concerns about daylight angles were largely unfounded. So my reasons for being here today is to give a bit of context to my submission, particularly Richmond on the Rise. And except for a few isolated developments, I don't see it happening. We're not hitting the 3-storey developments. And the concept was to build up around the business shopping area and then spread out instead. In these key areas, we've got car parks and more car parks. And just down here, the recent development, commercial development, 1-storey, or maybe 2-storey, just next to the old carpet place here. We're not getting these 3-storey developments. Why? think there are a couple of reasons and these generalizations, but people are unlikely to commit to something of this nature off the plan. It's just something that's quite a bit different for Richmond. From the developer's perspective, there's significant investment required to build something from the ground up for a multiple dwelling unit complex. You're probably looking at $5+ million outlay, and where are your sales going to come from? And the other issue is developers typically wait for a property to become available, then develop that particular property to the maximum extent permitted under the district plan. And with our fragmented title system, you're just not going to get those. There's not the incentive to try and push ahead to try and get to 3 stories by acquiring multiple properties. So I'd like to suggest that we need a kickstart. Council has, in some ways with this Richmond on the Rise, has done almost everything they can to set the groundwork there for it to happen. It's like a situation of taking the horse to the water, can't make it drink. The council land bank, I was disappointed to see that didn't go ahead. I understand why. And as I just mentioned, in many cases, to make a 3-story development work, a developer is going to need to acquire adjacent properties. So my proposal is, within very specific areas, let's look at a significant discount on developer contributions and probably targeting what was the original medium rise area from going back to a couple of years back, and commit to a very specific time frame for developers to be able to pivot to this new approach, or even to attract attention or interest from outside of the district. So suggesting an initial 5-year period where you say, okay, development contributions in this particular area are going to be discounted for 5 years to try and kickstart Richmond on the Rise, and with the option to extend it for a further 5 years in the same area. There was a newspaper article recently about Christchurch trying to get to their medium rise. They discovered it's taking much longer to hit the targets than they expected, but they are confident that they're getting there, that they're on the right track. But you need these incentives to try and help it to happen. Don't provide any guarantees that these discounts will be extended to other areas in the future. But if successful, maybe work again on this in a 5+5 year extension, moving through areas where buildings and infrastructure are typically at the 60 to 70 years old, where it is economically feasible to say, okay, let's flatten things and start again. As far as the development levies are concerned, wastewater, I believe that a lot of the medium rise that can be managed without significant infrastructure upgrades. Water supply, we have adequate supply and pressure in most areas. Stormwater, some on-site mitigation is possible. Look for alternative secondary flow paths, which may mean acquiring specific properties. Finally, for reserves, strategic purchase of properties or rights of way for pedestrian linkages. The one that I'm thinking of in particular at the moment would be linking, I forgot, the Wensley, just up from Wensley Road, there's a property that could link through to the old people's area. And multi-purpose reserves, I think Wilkes Reserve could have some things in to cater for other things other than just dog walking. That's me, done. So.
Okay, thank you. That was very clear and slightly over time. So, but your submission is very clear, and so thank you for coming in and speaking to it and placing those matters of emphasis on it. So, thank you. Next up, we have David Ogilvie. Welcome, David.
I'm talking today particularly about the development of financial policy, contributions policy. And my first or my immediate response is that it's premature. Reviewing this policy when the 25-26 annual plan process is underway appears to be poor timing. the actual review of the policy isn't imperative. It could easily have been deferred until after the annual plan had been consulted on, submissions considered, and the annual plan finally reviewed and approved. Moreover, the annual plan itself, as proposed and pointed out by management, is that there will be what are called material changes to the long-term plan. So these and perhaps other material changes are likely to affect the policy we are reviewing today, or you are reviewing today. So my point is, a change, say, from now to perhaps July and August of this year would be appropriate and acceptable and appreciated. My second point, when I look at the actual policy itself, is that the HUD, the HUD for Motueka at 3,129, compared with the Waimea original one at $22,846, is hugely disparate, especially when you consider what is needed for the two main Motueka stormwater drains, the Thorpe drain and the Woodlands drain. Turn to page 20 and 24, 25 of your plan, and it shows on table 10 that the district-wide capital expenditure for the next 10 years is going to be 90 million, of which 80% will come from developers and 20% from other sources, primarily from urban ratepayers. Now, I'm not quite sure how the 80% factor has been agreed upon, but I think it's probably too low. I'll be looking at probably 90%, because very often the development causes problems elsewhere in the stormwater networks. And the best example I can think of is a local example where with the Motueka West development, 200 sections being developed, the impact on the drain where that stormwater is going into, the Woodlands drain, is quite high. I mean, even recently with two reasonably heavy rain events, the Woodlands drain was a tipping over point. And that was only the land which has been affected currently. When the houses go on with streets and footpaths and the like, that effect will be quite considerable. So when you're looking at those sort of development charges, you need to look at with particular networks, it varies. Perhaps the Tasman Stream and Bulk Creek network is quite different from the drainage networks we have in Motueka. The next point I want to make really is the Papakainga and General Maori land remission. That will actually reduce by the 50% proposal from $3,000 plus to $1,500 plus for the developer. It's a huge remission as proposed. So rather than paying the 80%, the developer then will be paying the 40%. Again, an additional cost to those outside the development, additional cost to the stormwater ratepayer. It's also contrary. I'll simply read out your own strong and clear statement on page 2 of the review. The purpose of the development and financial contributions policy is to ensure that a fair, equitable, and proportionate share of the cost of that infrastructure is funded by the development. The council, it reads, intends to achieve this by using financial contributions and development contributions. Now, this doesn't appear correct, either with the $3,000 for the Motueka HUD, nor for the remissions which are being proposed. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, councillors, for listening.
Thank you, David. Thank you for coming along and speaking to your submission. And again, your points were very clear, both in the written submission and in your spoken one. So Thank you for taking the time. Next up, we have Ian Sheaves on behalf of Wakatu Incorporation. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you for having me. Right. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to speak today. Thank you to the officers for preparing the draft policy and associated documents. Wakatu and Wahanga support the principles of DCs to fund infrastructure development in the region, and we support the principle that development pays for development. If we had a perfect market, the timing of supply and demand of servicing capacity would be aligned, and developer would have access to servicing which they're funding through DCs when they require. Unfortunately, with both supply and demand being lumpy in nature, there tends to be a disconnect between the timing of the supply and demand sides of the equation. This traditionally is met with temporary or permanent solutions, and in the case of stormwater, often detention systems. Previously, extra costs associated with creating temporary stormwater detention was offset by the DC's stormwater discount. This was fair, and it provided an incentive for council to keep up with demand. I think everyone can agree that paying DCs for a permanent solution is vastly preferable to spending money on works, which are then to be reworked in due course. The proposed policy change, which removes any discount, may see developers paying for a temporary solution, the subsequent development of that temporary solution, the permanent solution through DCs, as well as the associated delays. This seems very wasteful and inefficient. We've seen costs associated with development increase significantly over the last few years, partly due to inflationary pressures in the market, but also increased regulatory burden. This, along with consenting delays, creates a scenario where an ever-increasing proportion of a project is made up of fixed costs. This removes pricing flexibility for the market and exacerbates boom and bust cycles. We note that TDC and Wakatu share the view that development should pay for development, but the delivery of necessary servicing on a 10-year time lag flies in the face of this principle. It's Wakatu's strong view that better coordination between servicing requirement and servicing delivery is required, and TDC uses available mechanisms to front-foot development, provide more efficient, cost-effective housing solutions in the district. And then I think that any what the DCs cost becomes a lot less contentious if you can actually get the benefit of the DCs that you're paying for. And I might just make one little comment about Motueka West, that there's a significant amount of detention, permanent detention, designed into the 200 dwelling project. And so it will actually significantly improve the stormwater issues in Motueka rather than add to them. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So there's 2.5 minutes odd of question time available. So are there any questions? If not, I'll ask one. So noting your point about the potential disconnect in timing between investment and infrastructure, and given it's already challenging with a big district and multiple places we're trying to grapple with and the lumpy nature of demand, do you have concerns that if the government expands or requires us to zone 50 years worth of land, that is only going to become more challenging to match where development might occur and the infrastructure that may be required to support it?
Yeah, I think that there probably, I think there's two things that probably need to happen. One is to very difficult to sort of get ahead. I would say we're probably
very difficult.
We're maybe 10 years behind where maybe the perfect world would be. If we could get 2 or 3 years ahead, that would be exceptional, but obviously that is incredibly costly and probably not the resource or cash available to do that in the district, but it should be an aspiration, I think. And then the second thing is that at the end of the day, the resource management plan and the long-term plan and all the mechanisms which are already in place should be able to really direct and prioritize development. That's the mechanism which the council has got at their disposal to direct development to align with. And I know that the market's the market, but at the end of the day, the market will respond, I would say, favourably to those mechanisms being put in place.
Okay, thank you. One more. Do you see any place for public-private partnerships between council and developers, particularly for large developments that require a significant amount of trunk infrastructure, where that is paid for and developed in conjunction by the developer in one way, shape or form, and then recovered through some mechanism rather than the council necessarily being responsible for that infrastructure and then recovering it from the developer?
Sure. So I think that we're that's where we're at with Motueka. It's the wider Motueka West, not the 200 affordable housing, but the wider Motueka West. You know, the stormwater system is pretty extensive, as you'd expect in 100 hectares of flat land. And we're approaching this, and our discussions with the team have been that, you know, we will supply that, probably under some form of developers agreement, which will be the delivery mechanism will not be probably typical.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming along and submitting and also leaving some time for questions. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jackie McNay. So firstly, Jackie is speaking on behalf of Patternrise Limited and Wakefield Village. And so there's 10 minutes for that. And then subsequent, I think you're also speaking on behalf of Projects and Ventures Limited, separate submission entirely. 5 minutes on that, Jackie. So. Welcome, Dwayne.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors. Going to present as one presentation for all those clients, and Sally Jett is with us today, and she's going to give an introduction, provide the legal framework before we come on to talk about scenarios that affect the particular clients. Unfortunately, representatives of Property and Ventures cannot be here today and send their apologies, but we're representing them. But you'll be familiar with Dwayne Whiting, and he's here on behalf of Patternrise and Wakefield Village Developments.
Thanks, Jackie. Welcome, Sally, as well. Again, I will give you whatever time you need, bearing in mind covering 3 submissions. So if you leave time for questions and it makes that, obviously that'd be appreciated, should there be any. And I will give, so you want to speak to all 3?
Just
okay, we'll make it easier. Okay, thank you. Cheers, Sally.
Thank you. I've just got a 2-page hand up if I'm able to just provide that. And just while that's being handed out, it's the first page of it is just some of the relevant provisions of the Local Government Act that have informed the submission. They won't be new to you at all, but it's just useful to have them in front of us as I address you before I hand over to Jackie. And then on the second page of the document is just a summary of the submission points that I'm going to make in relation to the legal framework. So there's just really one issue that's addressed in the 3 submissions that Jackie has prepared and filed, and that is in relation to how stormwater development contributions are treated, and specifically the change to the remission or reduction of the stormwater development contribution. And the scenarios, Jackie's going to talk about a number of different scenarios, but the issue is the change from a 50% development contribution where on-site stormwater detention is provided to only allowing any form of reduction of development contribution for stormwater in the Richmond intensive development area, and reducing that from 50% to 25%. So that's the topic of the submissions. You will be aware of these provisions. The only basis for being able to charge development contributions is the development contributions in the Local Government Act. And so any development contributions need to be in accordance with those provisions. The starting point is section 199 development contributions may be required only if the effect of the development is to require new or additional assets or assets of increased capacity, which the territorial authority needs to incur capital expenditure on. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can't recover for contributions that for expenditure that's already occurred, but it still needs to be, if it's already been incurred, it needs to be in anticipation of the development. So essentially, as the court said in the Neil construction case, there needs to be a causal nexus, a direct causal nexus between the development and the demand for infrastructure that it creates and the expenditure that's happening. And then equally, there are some limitations on what we've colloquially called double dipping, that you can't have a development contribution for something that there's also a financial contribution for, or where the developer will fund or otherwise provide for the same network infrastructure or community infrastructure. Then the purpose of development contributions in section 197AA is to recover from those persons undertaking development a fair, equitable and proportionate portion of the total cost of the capital expenditure. And at 197AB, you must, when you're exercising duties and functions under these provisions, which includes preparation of the development contributions policy, you must take into account the principles in 197AB, which include only requiring development contributions if the effects or cumulative effects of developments will create or have created a requirement for the TA to provide or to have provided new or additional assets or assets of increased capacity. And another principle, cost allocations should be determined according to and be proportional to those who benefit from the assets to be provided, as well as those who create the need for those assets. So within that framework, the crux of the submission on behalf of these three entities is that a development contribution cannot be required where a development doesn't generate a demand for new or additional or increased capacity assets. A development contribution can't be required where the developer is funding the same stormwater collection and management that the network infrastructure would otherwise be providing. Development contributions should be fair, equitable and proportionate to those who create the need for the assets and to those who benefit. And where a development has a minimal contribution to demand for new or additional or increased capacity assets, the development contribution should be proportional to that contribution. And lastly, the proposal to remove the development contribution discount everywhere except for the Richmond intensive development area and to reduce it in that area to 25% is therefore not for that purpose of recovering a fair, equitable and proportionate portion of the total cost, and is not for the, in accordance with that statutory purpose, and doesn't meet those requirements for equity and proportionality. So that's the legal framework. I'm going to hand over to Jackie to speak to what that means on the ground.
Thank you, Tally. Well, Sally's given us the legal framework. That's what I'd like to introduce, where I'd like to start. We're actually talking about a discount policy, but in reality, I think that name is a little bit misleading, as it gives the impression that you're getting a full product for a reduced price. And that's not what we're talking about here. What we're, in this scenario, what you're getting a discount because you only get a proportion at best of the stormwater service. So that's what we're talking about. We're talking, and this is our issue is all about proportionality. So for the landowners and development companies that represent today, and Dwayne is here for two of those and can answer questions in terms of their experiences. They've been involved in a range of projects. Many have been completed and many are currently being developed. This policy doesn't have a retrospective impact. We know that. So we know that those existing projects that are already in the system are not going to be impacted. But these developers are looking to the future and will be involved in a range of future scenarios. And this will have an impact in terms of development and the price that they can bring a development to the market. And as we know, their costs are just going to be loaded to the cost of whether it be a section or a house. So I want to focus, I put in the submissions, the scenarios, but I want to just refocus on those scenarios. So dealing with the Waimea catchment, scenario one, there's a property within the map stormwater area. There's a stormwater pipe going across the frontage of that property. You can stick a lateral in and you can connect, and that takes care of your stormwater. You don't have to maintain, you don't have to do anything, but you do pay the full stormwater DC, but you get the full service. And we say, yes, that's fair, reasonable and proportionate, and you pay a fairly large figure, $22,846 at the moment in the Waimea catchment for that. No problem with that scenario. Scenario two, a property is in the stormwater contribution area, but in the council's long-term plan, and there's not capacity, but in the long-term plan, you are proposing to provide that capacity. That is the current Pattern Rise submission scenario. There's not capacity at the moment, so for the development that they've just more recently completed, they put in stormwater detention for primary and secondary flows. The key thing is it's not permanent, because when your long-term project hopefully comes to fruition soon, they will get that full benefit. So they've paid for that plus paid for DCs. But that's fair, because they had the choice. They could have said, okay, we'll sit back, we won't develop, we'll wait. That was their choice to go ahead. So, okay, fair, proportionate, and equitable in the circumstance. It was a choice, but they did pay for that. Scenario three, or I'm calling it 3A, a property is in a stormwater contribution area. There is insufficient capacity in the network, and the council has in the network to provide for stormwater, and permanent detention is required for both primary and secondary flows. In that scenario, you pay 50% of the stormwater, because it does flow into a council system, and it is a system that has been, at least has been or is going to be upgraded, but that's not going to be upgraded to be able to take your full amount of stormwater, so you pay 50%. And you also maintain that system forever. But we have to accept there's a level of fairness, proportionality. Some might say I should get more than 50% discount, but that's the policy. That's what it's based on, and that complies with the policies in the DC policy and complies with the legal framework that Sally's outlined. I would like to say in that scenario, an example of that scenario is the Richmond Pahara subdivision on Richmond Road in Pahara. Just to give you some concept of the kind of money we're talking about, there was a new detention basin and dam and detention basin put in to cater for that. It also catered for some additional flows that the council wanted to divert out of a catchment they were having problems with, and that came into that new dam and stormwater basin. By the time there was a design, the consenting and the construction of that, it was well over $1 million for that, and then they paid 50% of the council's DC. So that just gives you some idea of the sort of kinds of costs we're talking about. I'd like to talk about another scenario similar to what I call the 3B scenario, and perhaps looking at a smaller scale, because this isn't just an issue for big developers and people can be quite dismissive. It's going to be an issue that's going to affect someone doing a 2-lot subdivision, or someone putting in a second house on their property for family often. So it affects everybody. So in this scenario, and I've had this scenario in a couple of subdivisions and some current inquiries. Rural residential zone, ironically noted in the rural residential unserviced zone in Ruby Bay, but it is in the stormwater catchment area. No capacity, really no stormwater system, no piping anywhere. You may have a roadside ditch. That would be the maximum that is there. They subdivide that property into 2 allotments, or they erect a second dwelling for family or for anyone. Then they're required to put in their own system, because there's nothing for council has. So that may be a detention tankage type system, or a small detention basin on site. They consent that. Okay, I'm nearly finished. So they pay for the consenting of that, the construction, and currently they pay half the 22,846. They pay just over $11,000 for that, plus the cost of that system. On average, I'd say it's up to 20K for an on-site system for an additional allotment, and so they pay about northwards of 30K for stormwater, and don't get that much out of it. This discount policy, they will end up paying $42,000. And they might have a roadside ditch, and that's all they get. Is someone in the actual scenario 1 where they can just click on to the council's stormwater system. They pay $22,000. So how is that fair, proportional, and reasonable and equitable? And we say it's not. Thank you.
Okay. And there's a little time for questions. So if there are any questions. Question. So do you see any risk? So the way council had it outlined to us by council staff is particularly in Waimea. One of the challenges is that the bottom end of the stormwater network was planned, designed, bought, built, paid for to a large degree, although there's now a very large project about to go to make that fully effective some considerable length of time ago. And that basically sets the overall parameters for all of the stormwater disposal, because that's ultimately where it all ends up. And when that was designed at the time, which is now a long time ago, and as I'm sure you're aware, the standards around stormwater and the volumes and the runoff and the rainfall events that are anticipated are significantly higher and greater in intensity than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. The assumption was that without detention, within the normal course of events, that was capable of delivering for the future development of Richmond. Now, 2 things have happened since. A, that scenario of the intensity, the amount of rainfall, the runoff that has to be catered for, and also the future development has probably gone much faster than was anticipated. And now the advice we receive is, in order for that, which can't be, there is zero chance of that being increased in capacity, we need both the detention and the capacity that's contained within the Bawks Creek network in order to enable the future development that's planned to be able to be catered for. So given that, how would you expect us to fund, and why do you see that providing detention and contributing to the massive bit of infrastructure that allows all of the development to happen is unfair or unreasonable? I'm missing the connection.
Well, I've maintained a lot of. I think this is I think you brought up a range of issues, and there are a range of scenarios in that. And this is a knee-jerk reaction. And I'm not saying there doesn't need to be assessment of that and the figures work through on that, but that's missing. The accounting of that is missing. And there may be, I've outlined a range of scenarios. There may be another scenario, but you're saying anybody that puts in permanent detention now, unless you're in the intensive development area, you're not getting a discount. And that's affecting the whole of the district. And so there may be another category that goes into the discount, but to say we're just going to pull out the discount when some people will be permanently providing for all of they still won't have a pipe going past them. And so you've taken one scenario and chucked out a whole policy outside of your 3-year review of the policy. And I don't think that's widely known.
Yeah, well, I think the challenge is 3 years is a very long time in both development, council, and there's a lot of money goes through the system in 3 years, as I'm sure Dwayne's aware.
Yes.
So
Yes.
if we delay reviews potentially, and not trying to prejudge the outcome of this, the risk is that someone has to pick up any difference between what we collect, and 3 years is a very long time in both council and development.
I agree.
A lot of money can pass through the system.
Yeah. But it's firstly in accounting, you need to do your figures. You then need to look at the legal framework and see if you are legally able to do it. And I don't believe
I completely understand the point you're making. Outlining the scenario.
I understand it's not simple, but I think that this review has been light in its assessment, and certainly light in its consideration of advantages and disadvantages, because it's like the advantages and disadvantages are paying this bill. It's actually it's the advantage and disadvantage of how you collect it and how that meets the purpose and principles of the Local Government Act.
Yeah. Well, I'm acutely aware we are people driven by statute, and crossing our I's and dotting our T's is important. So the legal considerations will clearly have to be considered as part of deliberations around this. So thank you for the very detailed. I'm way out of time. Apologies for hogging the proverbial, Councillor Hill. So we'll move on. Next up, we have Bruce Struthers. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll hand over to you. I'll give you the proverbial dinger at about 4.5. So if you wish to leave time for questions, please do so.
Okay. Consider me to be a pig dog, hunting for full disclosure on behalf of the ratepayer. I own a retired pig dog, and he bears the scars of his past efforts. But every time I take out his lead before taking him on a walk, he makes as much noise as a huntaway, which is why you hear from me frequently. The development contribution policy adopted for the long-term plan of 2015 through 2025 has a clear statement of objectives. Through this policy, Tasman District Council is seeking to set out development contributions in a transparent and consistent manner, and at a level that requires a fair share of the capital expenditure for infrastructure to be met by those who are creating the new demand for infrastructure in the district. The language defining the purpose of the policy before us was watered down around 2021 to state, the purpose of the policy is to ensure that fair, equitable, and proportional share of the cost of that infrastructure is funded by development. The current policy under the heading Other Funding Decision Factors requires the Council has considered the funding of growth infrastructure against the following matters: the distribution of benefits between the whole community, any identifiable part of the community, and individuals, and the extent to which the actions or inaction of a particular individual or group contribute to the need to undertake the activity. The developers who are complaining about being burdened with a development contribution have total control over what materials they use when they build houses, how much of that area is covered by impermeable surfaces, which contributes directly to stormwater flashy flows. So they are responsible more than any for the need for any infrastructure demands, particularly in the stormwater area. Going on to the existing policy, the cost and benefits, including the consequences for transparency and accountability of funding the activity distinctly from other activities. So I can summarize the feedback, which I'm sure you've read, by asking one question, which I believe needs to be asked by elected members. The answers need to be transparently provided to rate-paying public, not hidden away in the minutes of a workshop that never sees the light of the day under the cloak of commercially sensitive information. The question is, who directly and immediately will benefit from these proposed changes? The likely beneficiaries have already revealed themselves in a full council meeting about this time last year. They expressed concern about the effect of increased developer contributions on affordable housing. Quote, the new mums and dads going through will not be able to afford it. I can tell you that. They state that developers cannot accommodate any increase in development contributions because of their slim and decreasing margins, which they categorize as, quote, bugger all, close quote. They state that developers with 15% margins make half the margins that home builders do at 30%. This implies that 45% of the price of a home goes directly into their pockets. They just pass on the cost of development contributions. You've already heard me say that the development contribution as structured now is basically the district and local government passing on their purchasing power with lenders and their reduced lending rates onto the developer without any additional cost to the developer, while the district takes on the full risk of building infrastructure for projects that are not guaranteed to actually occur, and the developer could choose not to build and then sell at a higher price a section or a subdivision which has the infrastructure in place on our dimes. As in 2015, those who create the demand for new infrastructure should bear the cost. The developer's contribution should be 100%, a very easy number to calculate. The developers have no problem passing on their contribution to new owners. Why is the district borrowing money to exclusively benefit developers, home builders, and the proud owners of new homes?
Thank you, Bruce. You've got 30 seconds to knock time for one very quick question. And
Mr. Mayor. Bruce, thanks for that. Do you see a justifiable alternative? Justifiable is probably not the right word. And an alternative.
Any developer is running a business. They need to take into account all the costs and decide whether a project is worth engaging in or not, just as the district does. They don't need a handout from the district to get going on their project.
Thank you. Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Again, very clear submission and clearly spoken to as well. So thank you for your time. Next up, we have Matthias Schaffner on behalf of Tasman Democracy. So Matthias, welcome. Over to you. Dinger, as you may have noticed, if you leave time to questions, the time kind of expands a bit depending on the length of the questions and the answers. So feel free to use your 5 minutes as you wish.
Thank you. Good morning. So I only would highlight a few issues with the proposed changes to your policy. First, your staff acknowledged that the public would consider this policy review as unnecessary, and as a matter of fact, it is unnecessary because it had been reviewed last year and the next review is due in 2 years from now. I was pointed to a council resolution from last year that resolved that we have this policy review in 2025, but this was only recorded in the meeting minutes. There was no agenda item, so in consequence, it's a breach of your standing orders. Second, the Local Government Act requires that members of the public, quote, should be given clear information by the local authority concerning the purpose of the consultation, quote end. I could not find the purpose of this consultation in the consultation material. Next, the Local Government Act requires that the council must have regard to the costs and benefits of any consultation process. I could not find a cost and benefits analysis in the consultation material. Already in March, we expressed our concerns and raised this issue with a long letter, detailed description with the council. We received back a one-line email response, quote, your opinion is noted but not shared with council. We asked if the council could please explain why it disagrees, and your friendly staff, Mr. Townshend, again replied with a one-line email saying, quote, "No explanation will be provided and we will not engage with you further on this matter," quote end. Once again, we were very concerned regards the council's unwillingness to engage, especially in light of Section 82 of the Local Government Act, which requires that the council provides reasonable access to relevant information. So we requested Legoima to provide the information. We waited for weeks until the last day of the consultation process, but no response was provided. So we could not include the requested information in our submission. We also learned that another community organization asked exactly the same question that we put forward. They got a response within 2 working days with a detailed explanation. Besides these significant procedural errors in regards to the consultation process, there's also a material error in the policy itself. And one of the speakers before me highlighted all the legal requirements from the Act, so I don't need to go in detail anymore into that. But just one point, that what is required, that the development contribution must be fair and equitable. But in the consultation document that is on the website, we can read, quote, "The discount is not consistent with the fairness and equity principle," quote end. So the council openly admits that the proposed change does not align with the fairness and equity principles as required per the Local Government Act. So it is in contravention with the Local Government Act by default. And lastly, last point, I would like to mention that here in Tasman, we have the worst regional affordability in terms of housing. It's even worse than Auckland. We are last in the country. That was a study from the Massey University. And it seems to me that your development and financial contributions policy is nowhere addressing this issue. So in conclusion, we oppose this policy change and we are absolutely not satisfied with the consultation process, but I'm happy to take the question if you have some.
Thanks, Matthias. Are there any questions? In the absence of any other questions, I'll ask a question. Firstly, do you have a view on how the development contribution policy, if changed, would enhance our housing affordability? So that's the first question. And the second one is, you have noted that the provision of discounts, I think this is your point, isn't fair and equitable. The previous speaker but one, i.e. representing the developers, said the lack of discounts is not fair and equitable. So how do you suggest the council weighs up those two using exactly the same piece of the Act for completely different perspectives? So the other two questions.
Yeah, they're really good questions. And the answer is that I think the council has a too narrow approach. It's just, we look at this, we look at this, we look at this, but housing needs to be looked at a much broader view. It includes everything, large scale developments, just rural development, tiny homes on wheels. It includes anything. And you're not, it seems to me, you're not willing to take this step, to have a holistic view about housing and how to make it affordable in the district. It's again, we just look at wastewater detention enrichment as single tiny piece of the equation, but yeah, we can make it more equitable, less equitable, higher discount, lower discount, but it's not the full picture. It's too narrow focused. That's the issue. So I cannot answer your question because the issue is much bigger than the discount.
I would 100% agree with you. The housing affordability issue is much bigger than any one component of a council policy or otherwise. So thank you very much. Time for maybe one more question if there is one. If not, thank you very much, Matthias, for the written submission and coming in and speaking and being available to answer questions. So that concludes the speakers in relation to development contributions. So we'll now take a break we'll take 15 minutes. If we're back here at 22, there are the next speakers in relation to the schedule and fees and charges starting at 10:45. Bruce, you're first up in that line of speakers as well, followed by Matthias. So, and then we'll move on with other speakers after that. So we'll take a 15-minute break. first, we just need to move and consider this resolution, which just receives the submissions we heard previously, accepts all of those submissions, declines to accept late submissions after that date. Does someone like to move that resolution? Move Councillor Ellis, seconded Councillor Mailing. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. And then there's a similar resolution in relation to the item we're about to consider. So, Emily, I'll just come across to you and then we'll consider this and then we'll move into the submissions.
Kia ora koutou. So we're doing the hearings for the draft schedule of fees and charges for 2025-2026. We received 64 submissions, including one late submission received on the 29th of April. 14 people are scheduled to speak today. And please let me know if you've got any further information you want provided in the deliberations report. Thank you.
Thank you. So if someone's happy to move the resolution, including accepting the late submission contained up there, move Councillor Maru, seconded Councillor McKenzie. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Right, so now we will move on with the submissions themselves and we will start with Bruce. Welcome back, Bruce.
Thank you, Mayor King and Council. Tasman District Council is a unitary council. How the public understands that is they refer to the council as one monolithic entity. They don't distinguish between elected members, the executive leadership team, or staff. I can't let an analogy go without using it. I consider that to be like a pork roast. The elected members face the public, explain council decisions and programs, and take the hardest knocks at below market levels of remuneration. The executive leadership team presents options for elected members to decide on. And they're pretty consistently productive in providing a lot of reading material for you. The remuneration for approximately 5% of staff, namely the executive leadership team, over $160,000 a year, accounts for 11% of the remuneration expense. This is from the 2024 annual report, or the last annual report. And then on the pork roast layer, rank and file staff members do the actual work of delivering council services. Elected members are like cracklings toasted by interaction with the public demanding answers. The executive leadership team is similar to a thick layer of fat. Rank and file staff members who are asked to do more with less and fewer numbers are the lean muscle that drives the pig. The solution to rising rates, fees, and cost is simple. And by the way, I read this article closely and didn't really get an answer until I looked into the previous annual reports. On page 2025 of the annual report through 2027, it looks like the executive leadership team averages $257,000 a year, which is 2.3 times the average for all staff. Staff average about $109,000, which is a good paycheck, but still not worth the stress that they're put under. And councillors average $64,000 a year. In other words, 1/4 of what the compensation for the executive leadership team. The CEO drags down 6 times the council's remuneration. So I think it's time for a performance review. TDC is not getting its value for its money from the executive leadership team. As I posed in my written submissions, you would cut a few $1 million off your cost by eliminating the entire executive leadership team, promoting the frontline managers, and giving a raise which is commensurate with the rate of inflation, and bring compensation back into kilter. This is not a private corporation. There are no stock options. The remuneration structure that exists in councils, which causes a huge gap between the workers and the executives, has to be narrowed down for you to continue to control your costs. I'm amazed at how many times you've had to say sometimes council doesn't get it right. I personally do that on a daily basis to my wife. I apologize for what I haven't done right. I can't imagine what you have to own up to in making those admissions, and I support you in what you're doing.
Thank you, Bruce. Are there any questions? There's a couple of minutes left. Councillor Dakey.
Thank you, Bruce, for your submission. One of the things we've heard from the community is really they don't support a large level of change in service at the moment. Would you consider that some of the ideas you've presented there would be better at a long-term plan than an annual plan? Do you feel like some of those changes you're suggesting would be better fixed into a long-term plan conversation?
I think some of the recommended reductions of service are too little money for too little effort. For example, losing $2,000 a year on closing Richmond Library for the days you're talking about, and eliminating child programs in the library isn't worth the cost of the analysis and doesn't really make a difference on the bottom line. I think you need to look at major structural changes in how services are delivered, and I think you have to introduce a program of very stringent metrics. When I was at Amazon.com, I was in their Six Sigma program. We measured everything, and customer service and customer satisfaction was one of those things. I think you need that level of formality to understand before things go out into the public whether you're getting what you need out of the proposals, and finding the root cause of a defect, as they call it, in Six Sigma programs, and eliminating that defect.
Thank you. There's time for one more question if there is one. If not, thank you, Bruce. Thank you for your submission and the detail that it contains. Next up, we have Matthias Schaffner. Welcome back, Matthias.
We're still on the fees and charges, right?
Oh, we're still on fees and charges.
Okay, good. So good morning. Your staff told me that you have all read our written submission. So I only would highlight a few issues with your fees and charges with the proposal. The consumer price index was between 2 and 3% during the last financial year. And in the light of these numbers, it seems absolutely unreasonable to increase most fees and charges by 10%. I just don't understand it. The joint Nelson-Tasman committee stated in a report that the Nelson-Tasman region forms a common labor and housing market, quote end. And the Nelson City Council proposed to increase their fees and charges by 2.2%, which is in line with the consumer price index. So I absolutely don't understand why you're doing it differently and have it at 10%. So just to mention a few items that we raised, Legoima releases, the Ministry of Justice has clearly stated that a charge of $38 per half hour is reasonable for accessing official information. The Office of the Ombudsman confirmed this number. Other agencies around the country follow this advice to have it at $38, and you propose $60 per half hour. I fail to see any reasonable justification for this looking across the country. This charge especially impacts non-profit organizations and individuals that act in the public interest and need access to official information for their work and advocacy. The next item is your newly proposed, quote, environmental incident inspection charge. It's a beautiful name. However, Section 36 of the Resource Management Act provides an exhaustive list of activities for which local authorities may impose charges related to resource management issues. Your proposed environmental incident inspection charge does not fall within this list of permitted activities under Section 36 RMA. I give you an example to understand this better. So environmental monitoring and enforcement, like other forms of law enforcement, is a public good that benefits the entire community. For example, when the police conducts a roadside alcohol test, drivers are not charged for the police officer's time or the testing equipment, as this is recognized as a public service. Similar environmental inspections serve the broader public interest by protecting natural resources. The proposed charge creates a financial incentive for the council to pursue inspections and enforcement actions in ways that may prioritize revenue generation over efficiency. So it creates a conflict of interest, and efficiency in these inspections is clearly spelled out in the Resource Management Act. Then the proposed increase in regards to waste management are well above the general increase of 10%, but not detailed reasoning was provided why this is. And we already heard in previous council meetings a lot about illegal rubbish dumping. So nobody should be surprised that this gets worse when people cannot afford anymore the charges for waste management. And the last point I'd like to make is in regards to aerodromes. In regards to charges for the Motueka and Takaka aerodrome, it states, quote, the charges may be varied by the enterprise and property services manager where special circumstances exist, quote end. I oppose this as strong as I can because discretion given to the enterprise and property service manager needs to be questioned, especially in light of the several suspected instances of fraud where the council issued invoices to themselves in order to circumvent the notification requirements under the Resource Management Act. That's not hypothetical, that's a matter of fact. We need a lot more transparency when it comes to the aerodromes, not just whitewashed reports and discretion. So in conclusion, we oppose the increases for fees and charges because the community is already struggling with affordability of pretty much everything. And so your proposed increases cannot be in the best interest of the community. I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks, Matthias. So there is time for some questions, if people have them. Councillor Dakey.
Thank you, Matthias, for your statement and the submission. Tasman democracy, do you see, so obviously there's a user pay system and you talk about the burden on ratepayers with general rates. Fees and charges often, as elected officials, we try and adjust them so the user pays. I do note that perhaps more detail would be required for you to understand some of the decisions that are made. But does Tasman democracy support user pays, or do you support more of the spreading of that burden on the ratepayer? Because we're very cautious. Yes. Obviously, we'd like to do neither. Yeah. We'd like to have both low. Yeah. But do you support the user pays model as a way of reducing rates?
Yes, we support the user pays model when it is clear what the cost for the council is. But this is not clear. We only see the numbers for this item, you need to pay this. But we do not see a breakdown, not in the consultation material, not in the annual report. We see it nowhere what the actual cost for this activity of the council is. So we cannot see, are we overcharged or not? But then the second point is some of the items is not user pays. For example, Legoima, it's not user pays. It's a public good. It's enshrined in Legoima and the Local Government Act that the council needs to be open and transparent. So it's not a matter of user pays. It's just release your information as much as you can. Open your workshops, and then there wouldn't be so much inquiries or requests for official information if you are proactively more open and transparent. So this is not a question, this area specifically, I'm really concerned, and this is not an area about user pays. It's about your duty to be open and transparent.
Thank you. Quick question, Councillor McKenzie.
Okay, yeah, maybe it's not a question, or maybe it is. Yeah, no, it is a question. It is a question. It would be remiss to sit here and hear you refer to fraud being committed. And so my question is, what do you intend to do about your accusation of fraud?
I heard a lot, no, not a lot. I heard a statement from one of the group who is aware of this, what I said, and he suggested to go to the New Zealand police. But I understand this is wrong. First, if you look in the terms of reference of the Audit and Risk Committee that you surely be aware of, it explicitly states that the Audit and Risk Committee has the mandate to investigate fraud. It's clearly spelled out. And second is that you have a fraud policy that was adopted, or I don't know how it came into light, but the fraud policy exists within the council, and it clearly states out the process for investigating fraud. And it's not about going to the police. You have to do the job internally. So I guess bringing this into attention, that's my duty. I do it. And then it's from that on, you need to do what you need to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Matthias, for your submission and being available to answer questions. Next up, we have Mark Woodhouse. Welcome, Mark.
Kia ora koutou, good morning. Mark Woodhouse, as Tim says. I'm speaking to the fees and charges proposed for the Motueka and Tākaka aerodrome in particular. I own a hangar at Motueka and I'm part owner of an aircraft used for recreational flying from Motueka. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission. Page 6 of your statement of proposal under the heading aerodromes justifies an increase in movement fees by claiming the increase is required to cover increasing costs. However, no breakdown is offered on what those cost increases are. I understand and support the need for cost recovery in order to minimise pressure on ratepayers. And I acknowledge that the 7% increase in single aircraft movement fee and the single user annual fee is modest compared to other council charge increases, but is still significantly above the general rate of inflation. However, my submission is that in the past 12 months, revenue at Motueka Aerodrome has increased significantly with the commissioning of the New Zealand Post depot on the corner of Queen Victoria Street and College Street, which we were advised at the Motueka Aerodrome user meeting was about $80,000 per year. And the legal costs have significantly reduced with the departure of a litigious neighbour. Consequently, I contend that the single aircraft movement fee and the single user aircraft annual fee should reduce, not increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Plenty of time for some questions, should there be any. Councillor Kinnermont.
Thank you. Thanks for coming along today, Mark. So what do you want it reduced to? What would you see as beneficial? And obviously it has to go up something, but what would you see as reasonable cost?
I'm not sure I understand your comment. Obviously it has to go up. It was less than 12 months ago that we went through a process of establishing a reasonable fee to cover costs. I mean, I would feel comfortable if the fee stayed the same. It's a minor, it's $1 a landing increase, and it's $25 a year annual user fee increase. And on the face of it, it's minor, but it's a point of principle. Increasing costs? I wonder. There may well be increasing costs coming, which would have to be managed in a conversation with the users. But at the moment, there's no evidence of increasing costs.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? So just coming to one of the points you made, that so should the council generate more revenue through leases or through other purposes that create revenue for the airport, and then should there be a surplus in that account through the commercial activities that we have that offset rates? I'm not quite sure why you see, if we get additional revenue from another source, that should result in a discount for the aircraft using the airport. I take your point about transparency over what is the cost that is driving the percentage increase, but I'm unclear why you would think that if we're getting additional revenue from another source, that should be taken off the revenue we're receiving from aircraft users.
I don't have access to the accounts for the aerodrome, so I'm making some assumptions here. And my assumption would be that income for the aerodrome is derived from aircraft movements, hangar leases, commercial leases, and that forms part of the total income, which covers the total operating costs. If part of that income is ignored and any perceived increases are targeted at one part of the income, i.e. the aircraft movers, then it could be argued that the Motueka Aerodrome is being used as revenue generating for general purposes in the TDC.
So,
and that's
so Motueka Aerodrome is as a commercial asset of the council, and absolutely it is there to provide a return, should that be possible, to the council as a whole. So okay. I think that is a conversation, probably more of a philosophical one, but it is held as a commercial asset, not just a cost recovery entity that is all contained just within the airport activity itself.
Okay. Well,
yeah. So I guess that's why the potential.
Okay. I mean, I hear you, Ms. Mayor, and I understand it. It's an asset that generates income, and if you can justify and generate good income, it helps the rest of us ratepayers. But to actually say that the increase was due to cover increasing costs, I think is a little thin.
Yeah, so that's the point that I will pick up, obviously, through the deliberations in terms of clarification of what's driving those costs and how is that being allocated to the airport users on the landing fee. So yeah, take that point, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, out of time. Thank you for coming in, both speaking to your submission and being available to answer questions.
Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Katrina Valentine on behalf of the Mapua Boat Club.
Katrina wasn't available to come there, so I'll ask to read it.
Good as gold. So, and Tim, you are speaking next of your own submission. So if you'd come up, we'll just wrap it up into one, and you can speak to Katrina's and then yourself, then your own submission.
Well, good morning, councillors and staff. My name, as you heard, is Tim Robinson. I live in Mapua, and I have a boat on a swing mooring near Mapua. But as Katrina wasn't available, I've been given the job to read the club submission this morning. So it says the boat club objects to the TDC fees and charges schedule for 2025-2026 on the grounds of excessive increases in the 24-25 schedule. Marlborough District Council annual charge for swings moorings 24 and 25 is $85 including GST, while Tasman District Council is charging $206 including GST for annual monitoring and administration fee. Reason for the increase: most fees and charges have been increased by 10% to recover costs and account for inflation. It's on the TDC website, Shape Tasman. It is valid, yet is not substantiated in any of the publicity material provided. The schedule does not state when a prior review of fees and charges took place, as noted in Local Government Act 2002, Clause 150, bracketed 4, which states the fees prescribed under this subsection 1 must not provide for the local authority to recover more than reasonable costs incurred by the local authority for the matter of which the fee is charged. By the absence of commentary clarifying the verification of reasonable costs, therefore makes the 25-26 schedule invalid and unenforceable. In the club's opinion, the breakdown of costs per work effort fee is mandatory and required to be published. The Navigational Safety Bylaw 2024 is currently operative and allows for mooring licence system and recovery of costs through a fees and charges schedule. No mooring licence protocol is in place for Mapua Channel, nor agreements reached with mooring owners. Implementing the recovery fees for a mooring licence before consulting and reaching agreement with the mooring owners would be unethical, immoral, and in breach of the Local Government Act. The Mapua Boat Club asked the Tasman District Council not to adopt the 25-26 fees and charges schedule, specifically pertaining to maritime charges, as we believe this schedule is in breach of the Local Government Act. See point 3 above. We request written acknowledgement of this submission and a response setting out the next steps to ensure compliance with the LG Act. That is about your boat club submission.
Steve, are you happy to take questions on that, or just want to?
Well, I didn't write it. I don't.
Okay, so it's probably best that you move on to yours, and then if there are any questions, we can ask them as part of that submission.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
As I said, I have a mooring in Mapua, and it's been there 13 years. So my submission says Tasman District Council mooring charges in Mapua have for a long time been inconsistent and unfair. This has been brought to staff attention on several occasions with no effect. I have a resource consent mooring and my fee is $143 per annum, which I'm reasonably happy with, although our neighbours in Marlborough only pay $83, $84, whatever it was, which doesn't seem quite right. The proposed new annum fee is $226. This is a 59% increase. Why such a large increase when the correspondence from Pete Renshaw on the 14th of March this year said the new system is designed to simplify everything and make the process of managing moorings in the areas easier? This doesn't seem right, as I have a resource consent. Surely it's just a name change required from resource consent to a licence. There's no different action needed on the licence to the resource consent. All the things he said he's going to do, they're already doing. Liability. I haven't seen any new requirements for mooring inspections. They all seem to be the same as before. We've had to ignore some of the past lifting the mooring block recommendations every 2 years for an inspection, as this creates a danger to the safety of the mooring of the craft by unbedding the block and leaving a hole, because most of the blocks are sitting down in the moat or even below it. Then not being able to get the block back in the hole correctly because you can't see, the Mapua Channel is always cloudy, except for a very few days of the year. And it sits up on its side if we have to pull it out, and then the chain goes down this way, and when it comes up this way, it gets under the block and lifts the block and rolls it. And if that happens in a flood with a big tide, and it has happened, we've had yachts take their whole block right down to the mouth of the Mapua Channel on the bar, and we've had to rescue them. I've been involved in that. So we proposed to Dan that we didn't lift the blocks, and he was acceptable with that. But that is still part of your regulation, and we would like that removed. The Mapua mooring area is unique to the Tasman marine area. It is not, and if not so in New Zealand. And there are decades of experience and knowledge by the team who help oversee the inspection and management of these moorings that others don't have. It is a very unique situation. The wear and tear here is, as you can imagine, is high, and is why some of us have gone to large rope moorings counterweights rather than chain and shackles. I can assure you we have the best management team in this area. We would welcome to sit down with the harbour master, bring him up to speed and work out a strategy to continue our maintenance with this program with him. That's it.
Thanks, Tim. There is time for questions. Councillor Manning.
Morning, Tim. Thanks for coming in. How often are they inspected, your moorings?
In the channel by us, we do them not on a regular basis because some moorings get a lot more use than others, so we'll inspect them more often. So they get inspected once a year if they're getting a lot of use, and once every 2 years if they're not getting a lot of use. And that is the regulation, I think, that the council asks us to inspect them within 2 years.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? So just in relation to the, I think you had a concern over why is a license different to a consent? So my understanding is that coastal permits and or that have been granted will expire at a certain point and then they'll need to be renewed. And there is obviously to the consent owner, i.e. the mooring owner, potentially quite a significant cost of reviewing and renewing that consent, particularly in the coastal marine area with all the associated issues that come with that. And it's the council's belief through that process that it'll be much easier within designated mooring areas. You no longer need to apply for a consent at the time that your coastal permit expires. It can be done through a license process, which will be simpler. Do you think the trade-off between a higher annual fee but not having to renew your consent at the time that it expires for your mooring is a reasonable one, or do you still believe the increased cost annually outweighs any potential cost of renewing the consent for your existing mooring?
Yeah, well, I don't know the cost of renewing a consent. I was imagining that they would just roll it over because we have all the conditions. I don't know what.
I suspect that is not an assumption you could make with resource consent renewals in the coastal area. So I guess that is one of the details in terms of communication and also information that in response to your submission we'll need to consider. But I think that is my understanding of the shift from consents or coastal permits through to licenses. But we can provide that as we go through the deliberation process in response. So
yeah, we would have to know that cost in comparison with what we're paying every year, because my consent was 15 years, so it's a long time. And the other thing is we haven't been told how often we're going to have to renew the license and what it's going to cost.
Yeah, okay. No, they're both good points. So hopefully we can clarify that through our response to your and others' submissions.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tim. And nothing further? If not, thank you. And thanks for presenting the Boat Club submission as well. Renee Campman. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No, so seeing as you haven't been here earlier, so 5 minutes, I'll give you a little dingy on the bell at about 4.5. If you want to leave some time for questions, please do so. It's over to you, though. You are not obliged to.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I would comment I'm a little surprised that I come and speak here today because part of your role as councillors is to act as representatives and advocates for the community, which is your ratepayers and users of your service. My initial reaction to the proposed fees and charges was quite frankly, fuck off. But I appreciate that's not very useful and that you're a monopoly protected by statute. So you're an animal of process, hence I'm sitting here. I propose to speak about one line in your budget item. I think there's a wider debate required about the overall rates package that you're proposing. But for the purposes of this morning, I'll just talk about the annual monitoring and admin fee for a mooring licence in the maritime section. And what is proposed is a fee of $226. As Mr. Robinson just pointed out, As a resource consent holder, he currently pays 143, and the question is, what has changed to justify the 58% increase? In my submission, I cheekily suggested that you amalgamate with Nelson City Council. And the reason for this is that their swing mooring charge currently is $95. Your existing fee is 117% above this. You could argue that Nelson's compact and its geography doesn't relate to Tasman. So I look at Marlborough. Their fee is $85. Your fee, current fee, is $142, 142% higher than their fee. I would expect the cost to be similar. And I guess just as an aside, I bought an olive grove in Marlborough 5 years ago, and when Sue told me what the rates were, I said, is that a quarter being used to Tasman rates? And she said, no, it's the rates for the year. Section 154 of the Local Government Act, which has been highlighted previously to you, identifies that charges must not recover more than reasonable costs incurred by the council for the matter which the fees are charged. If this is in fact the case, $226 is the required fee, my question is, what is the cost structure of the Tasman District Council? For comparison, if I own a dog, your proposed fees are $50 for a farmer, up to $90 for an urban dog. If I register my dog, I'll get an annual registration and I'll get a plastic tag. With respect to my mooring, what do I get? You're just maintaining a database. You could argue that moorings and dogs don't really compare, so I'll compare it to a swimming pool. I recently received an invoice for $216, which is a 3-yearly fee in effect, because it's got to be inspected once every 3 years. For that $216, the council provided me with a letter of notification, an owner's checklist. The council then came into the site, visit and inspection, and then provided me with a letter of compliance, which included a completed audit report. A mooring over the same period, if you assume your 10% inflationary period over the next 3 years, will cost me $776, substantially more than my swimming pool fee for the same period. A more direct comparison would be a mooring versus vehicle crossing. Both are on public land, both have public safety issues, both have significant private benefits. One has no fee, the other one you're proposing $226. And just coming to an earlier comment, the application for renewal of an existing mooring license according to your schedule will be $372. And I presume if you're adopting a user pays principle, that is the total cost. So I then wonder what the admin and monitoring of the mooring, actual mooring fee covers. Moorings in the Mapua Channel, as Mr. Robinson's identified, have been effectively self-managed by the local community for years with minimal bureaucratic oversight. Relief sought, I asked that the council put the line item in the maritime section, annual monitoring and admin fee, on hold and not adopt it. 2, I asked that the council revisit and make public the cost structure and rationale behind the proposed fee. And 3, give consideration to better value options for the community, such as outsourcing the service if you cannot match your neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you. So there might be time for one question. Last one. So you compared us with Nelson and Marlborough. So, and you may not know this, and feel free to just say I'm not sure, and we can find out. But do you know what percentage of the cost of the provision of that service that Marlborough and Nelson recover from the fee versus what component they're just covering through other sources, i.e. general rates?
No, I don't, because all I do is when I do a quick internet search, all I see is one line.
Yeah.
But I do wonder, how much does it really cost to keep one line in a database?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and I guess it's for us to figure out. It would be interesting to know what component of theirs is user pays versus public good compared to ours.
Mm-hmm.
So, yep. Yeah, we'll find out that answer. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming in and
Thank you for
appearing.
your time.
Cheers. Next up, we have Claire Kinnermoth. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you.
I think you're probably aware of how the process runs, so I'll give you a little ding at 4.5.
Thank you. It's probably going to be a bit of repetition for you. I'm sorry about that. As a brief summary, I have a financial interest in 2 moorings in the Mapua Channel. On the 14th of March this year, I received an email from the TDC Harbour Master relating to only one of these moorings, informing me of a proposed change to the way the TDC will manage its moorings. Both moorings, along with many others on the channel, have been there 40 plus years and are a permitted activity and currently incur no charges. The email has given rise to me investigating maritime fees and charges under the Just Paths Navigation and Safety Bylaw, as well as the Fees and Charges Bylaw 2025, hence my objection. I have read Section 150 of the Local Government Act 2022, which I'm sure you're all aware of and has been mentioned, that states you can recover reasonable costs incurred. Page 7 of the annual plan for this year states increased most user pay fees and charges by 10%, equaling 150,000. I also note in the fees and charges background document, summary of charges, most fees and charges have increased by 10% to recover costs and account for inflation. The Local Government Act makes no mention of accounting for inflation. It states quite clearly, recover reasonable costs. Currently, mooring owners with a resource consent are paying $143. The only annual fee shown in the fees and charges schedule states a fee of $226 for monitoring and administration, a 58% increase. Referring again to the letter of the 14th of March, and I quote, the new system is designed to simplify the process of establishing and managing moorings within the mooring area without the needing to go through the resource consent coastal permit process. Simplify, as defined in the Oxford Dictionary, is make easy or easier to do or understand. It would be fair to assume from this definition that the fees would reduce under the new system, but from the fees and charges schedule, it would appear they will increase by 58%. The proposed fees and charges bylaw schedule raises more questions than answers as how the TDC sees this new mooring system working. I submit that the Council is in breach of its duty under the Local Government Act by, in general, not applying all fees and charges in line with the Act. In case of moorings in particular, not directly consulting with mooring owners in regard to its proposed mooring licence system, its fees and charges and how it might work. I asked the Council to review the fees and charges are compliant with the Local Government Act, and it will cease implementing the mooring licence system until fully consulting with Mapua and other affected mooring owners. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Claire. Open for questions. Councillor Dakey, then Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Claire, for your presentation. Just a question, clarification. So you've had no point in the process where you contacted about these changes and how the new system might operate. Is that what I picked up from you?
That is correct.
Okay.
And can I also add, as I said, we received a letter for one of our moorings. I know the boat club has 3 moorings and it received 3 letters. Some people with moorings have received no correspondence at all.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Thank you, Claire, for your submission. This question sort of relates to all of the submissions that we've seen on the moorings. So I'm just wondering if you could clarify for me. They've talked about inspections of the moorings and lifting the concrete blocks. I think it was Tim, was it? Who carries out those inspections? Could you clarify that for me, please?
At the moment, we have a diver that carries out inspections on an annual basis. As do there's a person in the mooring that has a mooring in the channel that organises every year for the moorings to be checked. So
So
we
is
do
that
it.
provided by you,
We
not
provide
by,
the council.
is that looking to change?
Well, I'd like consultation to find that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you for both your written submission and coming in and speaking to it today.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Mr. Hillier.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome, Mr. Hillier. So 5 minutes.
Councillors, for those who don't know who I am, I'm Ray Hellier, and I'm opposing the council's proposed increase in the dog registration fee. I don't own a dog, but in the past I did own one, and he became a liability, so I got him put down, planted a grape plant on top of him, and he grew good grapes. Dog registration was first introduced in the 1860s. Maori nearly went to war over it. Dog registration was particularly helpful in keeping a record of high data dosing from the 50s to the 70s. Animals, especially dogs, can have a therapeutic effect on the elderly and the infirm. With a couple, when separated by death, the survivor will often prefer the company of an animal, either a cat or a dog, instead of choosing another partner. It has been said that no animal can consistently be more than a friend and than a dog. It seems to me to be a clinical and soulless form of money harvesting to increase the registration fee for these people. With the cutback of police services, especially in the rural areas, a dog can be a benefit to security. Working dogs, and here I'm referring to farm dogs, are an aid to the farm operation. They're a part of the farmer's tools, like a post driver. And when he's finished with it, he ties it up, puts it away. They require no council services, therefore I fail to see why the council needs to increase the registration fee. From where I stand, this is purely and simply money harvesting, creating a distraction from the council's poor economic management. I'm sorry for being emotional.
Thank you, Mr. Hillier. If there are any questions, are you happy to answer them?
Yeah, I'll answer questions.
Okay, Councillor Dakey.
Thank you, Ray, for your submission. I appreciate your passion here about animals. Council has sought to move to a user pay system, regardless of what we think it should cost to run the system. We're trying to move to that. Would you support that we staged over a longer period? Would you say that the increase this one time is too big? Would you support us stretching that increase out over a longer period? Because what we're trying to do is recover more of the user pays. Perhaps we've gone too far and perhaps we could stage that. Would you support that as an idea?
No, I don't agree with it at all, because the examples I've given do not cost the council any money, any time, for anything. The elderly have these dogs on a lead. They keep them inside. They're not straying. Nothing happens. And the farmers don't, the same thing. They take them out, they use them, and they put them back. The council doesn't even know how many dogs farmers got, because they don't go out and look. So why is it you're asking me that sort of question?
Okay, thank you for the answer to the question. Thank you.
Is everybody else too frightened to ask a question?
I'm about to ask. I'm about to ask if anyone else would like to ask a question. But you may be right. You may have scared them all off. Are there any more questions of Mr. Hillier before we let him depart? Thank you, Mr. Hillier. See you. It's been an interesting morning so far. Carol Damon. Welcome, Carol. Well, welcome, Carol. So I'll give you a little ding at 4.5 if you are still going, and questions if there's time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Let me just get my papers organised. Right, I'm going to talk on the dog control increase, the fee increase. Just as background, I'm the secretary of the Nelson District Kennel Association. I'm the treasurer of the Nelson Ladies Kennel Association. I'm a member of the Nelson Dog Training Club and 5 different German Shepherd clubs throughout New Zealand. I'm a member of Dogs New Zealand, and I also have a degree in zoology. So I'm very dog focused. My whole life is about dogs. So I'm commenting only on the rural aspect of the dog increase fee because I live rural and I have multiple dogs. I purchased my rural property in 2021 so that I could own more than 2 dogs, as my hobby is confirmation dog showing, and I also enjoy other dog activities such as Canine Good Citizen program and have dabbled in scenting. When I moved to Tasman in 2021, the rural dog fees were $30 per dog. So that's 4 years ago. In 2022, they increased to $32, a 7% increase, acceptable because inflation was 7%. The fees remained $32 in 2023. In 2024, they jumped to $45, a 40.6% increase. Was told this was to reduce the percentage from general rates towards dog control fees. Now, in 2025, we've been told that we are to receive a 55% increase in dog fees to $70. Same story to reduce percentage of dog control covered by general rates. Equates to around 400 to 500,000 additional revenue in 2025. Some basic stats, assuming the rural fees go to 7. 2021 to 25 is a 133% increase. 24 and 25 is a 120% increase. Rate of inflation is currently 2.5 to 2.2 to 2.4. That's assuming 5%, and you've asked for a 120% increase in dog fees over 2 years. There's a piece of information currently being circulated from TDC to support the fee increase that shows dog control staff salaries is estimated 925,000. I take this figure to include vehicles. Nelson City Council breakdown has salaries around 500,000. Where's your 425,000 extra? When I worked for Waimea County Council and TDC, we had 3 dog rangers that covered the whole area every 6 weeks, dosing dogs, and budgeted for 1 front office staff for 1 month in June. The fee was $10 per dog and 100% covered by dog control fees. We now have rumours TDC has 11 staff looking after around 16,000 dogs. Or does this cover animal control? I asked for some general information on what my dog can fee covered. TDC provides dog exercise areas. I could only locate 1, Faulkner's Bush. Blenheim, Nelson City, Christchurch City, Wellington have dog parks that allow separate areas for big and small dogs. TDC does not. I have my own 2.5 hectare dog park. Provides education. I've lived in TDC region for 13 years and never been offered education. I pay for it myself in the form of dog training. I believe that schools have several of the local dog trainers, such as you and your dog, teaching dog behaviour to children, not TDC staff. Maintaining records in the national database. Really? Minimum is 2 entries per dog's lifetime. 1 on first registration and maybe 1 on death, or it takes less than a minute to update a tick box. Why should I, as a responsible dog owner, subsidise the poor dog owners? Does not the fee of impounding, wandering dogs, etc. cover this? My dogs are contained in day run. My dogs are double fenced, or my property is double fenced, and my dogs sleep in crates at night. The only time my dogs leave the property is to go to dog shows out of town or to the vet or the groomers. The $70, I will get 1 gold-plated 20-cent plastic tag. Maybe TDC needs to look at introducing a metal lifetime tag, such as Selwyn and Wellington Council. Lifetime tags will reduce the amount of plastic, and it also means that people can pay online, as we don't need to line up for our little plastic tag. I would like to see some form of recognition for responsible dog owners. My dogs are pedigree dogs that are cared for like royalty, and most Dog New Zealand dogs members are.
If the fees are to increase, then responsible dog owners, like those that have had dog training courses, 2GC for example, or have appropriate facilities with no history of substantive complaints, should not be penalised for those that are not good owners. TDC previously applied a discount for dogs that had canine good citizen certificates. This has been removed. Nelson City Council gives the discount for Dogs New Zealand members, as other councils do. TDC does not. My personal opinion will be that there will be more unregistered dogs, as the elderly and those on lower incomes will not be able to meet this exorbitant increase in fees, or people will just not register their dogs saying they have died. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's time for a couple of questions. You noted Nelson City Council. So do you know what their charges are for, given that their budget seems to be substantially less, which may be because they have a tiny little postage stamp of area to cover, but
yeah,
do you know
their fees are about 120, but how can you compare apples with bananas? I mean, when I worked for the council, we had far more dogs in Nelson City, and we only had 3 people that were travelling the whole region.
Yeah,
and dosing dogs.
Yeah, so Nelson City Council fees are 100 and
I don't know. I don't.
So, but higher than ours.
Yeah, but I don't live in Nelson City.
No. Just the question is just by comparison. Do you know what Marlborough charge?
No, I'm not interested because I don't live in Marlborough.
Okay.
Why?
No, fair enough. I guess I'm just asking is in terms of what's a reasonable charge and what the cost that we're trying to recover is.
Yeah.
So the second part of the question is.
I lived in Christchurch, and I paid less than what I pay here.
Christchurch, very big city, different circumstances.
No, rural Christchurch.
Do you believe it should? Do you believe that dog registration should cover the cost of the council's cost?
So when did it not? Because as I said, when I worked for the council, it was 100% covered out of the rates. So at some point of time, you must have, not you, but personally, but the council must have taken money out of the general rates.
We have been, correct. That is exactly what has been happening, correct.
Last year, you actually said this is to stop coming out of the general rate. Correct. That was last year for 40% increase. And I accepted that. I said, yep, look, that's fine. Why are you using the same babble this year to say that you are reducing rates? You have not given us any figures. The figures that were supplied, because we asked in the dog community for you to supply a breakdown, we get this 925,000 for salary, 20,000 for something else, and it was not a physical actual budget. Any business produces a budget before they put a fees. There is no budget from what we've been told.
Okay, so point noted, and we'll respond to that through the written response to your submission post deliberation conversation. So time for one very quick question.
Thank you for your submission. Just a quick question on a personal level. You mentioned there it would be some people might choose not to register their dog, and maybe older people who are struggling financially, it might be a burden. Just as a ratepayer, would you support, if there was an option looked at for some sort of reduction for those who are elderly perhaps, would you support that as a ratepayer?
Oh, by oath. I mean, the people with dogs that are over, old dogs as well, they shouldn't be paying as much because how far can an old dog walk? People that are struggling, 100% agree, so that the dogs are registered. I think it's extremely important that every dog is registered and that you know where every dog is. So if a dog escapes or something like that, you know who the owner is. But for people that are responsible, the elderly or old dogs, there needs to be some sort of recognition. Because why should I keep paying for the person down in Oxford Street that you see every week on Facebook? My dog's escaped again.
Yeah, point noted.
Yeah.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you for your passionate submission and presentation. Next, we have Scott Burnett on behalf of Forest and Bird. Welcome, Scott.
Kia ora koutou. As a dog owner, I'm aware of that I benefit from access to public spaces for exercising my dog. However, I'm also aware that inadequate management of dogs in these areas, particularly on our sensitive coastal environments, leads to negative impacts or exacerbation
on our coastal birds. We believe it's appropriate for dog owners as exacerbators in this context to contribute financially through their dog registration fees toward the lessening of those impacts via improved signage, education and enforcement. We recommend that TDC increase the dog registration fee, and we recommend that revenue generated from this increase be allocated to funding specific improvements in dog management, namely improved signage. Last year's bylaw amendment created a lot of changes around the coast. There's a need for signage, a targeted public education campaign around wildlife protection from dogs, and directing people to the improved bylaw maps on the TDC website, and increased capacity for effective enforcement of the dog bylaw. Setting fees at a level to fund these activities is important for TDC to meet its stated environmental outcomes and responsibilities under its revenue and financing policy. The policy states a key community outcome is ensuring our unique natural environment is healthy, protected and sustainably managed, and it further specifies that TDC contributes to this through an effective education and dog control program, limiting negative effects on native fauna. There's currently a gap between this policy and the operational reality. Based on our observations and engagement, public education around wildlife is insufficient. Enforcement capability appears stretched, and signage indicating dogs at access restrictions, the presence of wildlife, etc., could do with some improvement. We would also like to see future signage aligned with Nelson City Council so that there's clarity for dog owners across the region. Finally, we suggest that dog registration fees are aligned with Nelson City Council. This would better fund Tasman and remove a divisive point of contention. In my quick Google desktop survey of other councils around the country, the Nelson City Council fee of 115 seems pretty middle of the road. An increase of fee here in Tasman would really help fund signage, education and enforcement. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you for your submission. There is time for, well, a bit of time for questions. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Thank you for your submission, Scott. What you're talking about education, do you have specific ideas of what type of education you expect?
Yeah, I think a brochure could be issued with dog registrations, and also made available through vets on the SPCA. I think that would be a really easy way. Perhaps some information on the TDC website. And we'd be really keen to input into that.
Thank you. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Scott. So I just want to test the proposed support for the increase. So the outcomes you talked about in terms of our wildlife protection, and if you just have good dog owners, isn't that something aspired to by all ratepayers? I just see the responsibility lays on people owning dogs, but we're managing a really small portion of the people owning dogs over the outcome for all ratepayers. So sitting here wondering whether there is an argument to have wider rate contribution to dog fees. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like that's an internal TDC matter that I don't have a clear opinion on.
So as long as the outcomes in terms of education, enforcement and protection.
Yeah, better protection for our coastal wildlife is what we're after.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything further, Councillor Kinnermont?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Given the huge area that we cover, how would you see us providing environmental protection public spaces in, say, Golden Bay or the West Coast, or, you know, because we can't put everybody everywhere. So how do you see that we would provide that service?
Well, I think public education is one aspect. Clear signage is another, that where a situation of a dog attacking wildlife or something like that's captured on camera, If there's not clear signage at that particular location, or the maps aren't super clear, it's really hard for council to take action against that dog owner. So that's a reason to have the signage be very clear.
Thank you. Just out of interest in relation to something that was raised by the previous submitter, and I'll ask you the question in the absence because you've gone, I missed my opportunity. Do you see, you mentioned aligning with Nelson City Council, and you also mentioned that a quick Google search shows a range of fees of which that fits somewhere in about the middle, which I'd agree with. There are places that run more complicated systems, and the previous submitter kind of indicated that a tag for life and a simpler system may help reduce costs. That's certainly got some merit. But I'm just looking at Southland out of interest because my son happens to live in Southland, has working dogs, etc. They run a system where the fee starts higher and there's a number of discounts. If it's microchipped, if your property's fully fenced, if you're a good dog owner, i.e. you haven't had any issues with council for 2 or more years, they then knock off $20, $30, $50 for different things. And if all the discounts apply, the fee's $50. Do you see some merit in that approach by starting with a higher fee possibly than what we're even suggesting, but discounting it back if you meet all those requirements?
I mean, I think that a lot of councils appear to have a discounted fee for desexed dogs. And I think that depends on how much of an issue you think unsexed dogs are in terms of cost of enforcement. I don't imagine that it's a massive...
In some parts of New Zealand, it's a very significant issue, but probably not for us.
And then a discount for pensioners, that sort of thing, I don't really, we don't have an opinion on it.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Celia, very, very briefly, seeing as you haven't asked one all day.
Oh, look, okay, I'll just leave it. That's fine. I can talk. It was just about the interface between Department of Conservation and Council in terms of responsibility for protecting coastal birds, but I can take that offline.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I'd add just at the end there is that a couple of years ago there was a little working group with DOC, Nelson City Council and TDC staff looking at signage and enforcement, and that petered out when the DOC person leading that moved on to another role. It'd be really good to kick that off again.
Thank you. Thanks, Scott. Thank you for both presenting and answering questions. Now we have Cynthia McConville, who is online. Welcome, Cynthia. I believe there's a presentation which hopefully will get put up as well. So same thing, submission being received, obviously, highlight anything, you have 5 minutes, and if you leave time for questions, there may well be some. I think you're on mute. Oh, you are on mute.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, now, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. 6.5 years ago, at a Forest and Bird Committee meeting, I accepted the role of protecting Golden Bay's shorebirds and seabirds. It has proved to be the hardest job I have ever done. Hard because it required the support of Tasman District Council in the recently approved dog control bylaw, and the support of the Department of Conservation's Tākaka office, who have shown their lack of knowledge of shorebird species and their presence on our coastline in their interactions with me. The Golden Bay branch of Forest and Bird have spent between $35,000 and $40,000 on this project. This includes habitat restoration and protection measures for nesting and roosting birds, educational signage, establishing predator trapping networks, and installing a bird hide at Taupata that hosts regional, national, and international bird watchers and wildlife photographers. So Forest and Bird Golden Bay wholeheartedly support the increase in the dog registration fee. We support raising the registration fee so that it has parity with Nelson City Council. And I'd like to explain now why we endorse higher registration fees. The Tasman District coastline supports 27% of the global breeding population of variable oyster catchers, indicating that this coastline is of international importance for this species. They also occur here at higher densities than any other region in New Zealand. That is a statistic we should be proud of, and a statistic we should want to maintain. But to do this, Council must provide the education, enforcement, and signage that is required. And I want to give you just one example of why. Can I have the first photo, please? Oops, no, that's not the one with the dog, please, in the nest. There are 4 there. So here is a dog that has flushed a variable oyster catcher off its nest and is now in the process of nosing the eggs and covering them with sand. The dog in question did not respond to its owner, calling it back. So if I could have the second photo, please, which is the one you showed previously. I really would like you to take a good look at this photo, particularly the hind quarters of this bird. This is a variable oyster catcher chick, not yet old enough to fly away, killed by a dog at Collingwood. And if I could have the third photo, please. So here's another chick, still unable to fly, killed by a dog at Collingwood. I'll quote veterinary surgeon Mana Stratton. Chick kill here is dog related. The deep puncture wounds around the hip area of these birds and the size of these wounds are too large for a cat, mustelid, rat or hedgehog. They indicate a dog grabbing the chick from behind while trying to escape. Mustelids tend to go for the back of the neck, and evidence supports dog attack. These 2 photos are the tip of the iceberg. Last summer, only 5 chicks survived the nesting season from the 11 pairs of birds that nested at this site. A bylaw that allows off-leash, out-of-control dogs into beach nesting sites needs to be backed up with proper enforcement and signage. I'm going to be very blunt here and say the nesting failures at 2 of our highest density beach nesting sites are a national disgrace. And if you could put up the photo, please, of the sign that we've suggested that Council might look at putting up. That's the one with the, and there should be another half to it with the text. Okay. So I've heard Shannon Green say that he has a good working relationship with DOC. And if this is the case, then Council should be asking the DOC Tākaka office to jointly fund signage that notifies dog owners that they're entering a shorebird nesting site. Signage like this is a minimum requirement. And I have to say globally, when I look at shorebird nesting sites, I don't see any that are even as friendly as this. Many of them just say, stop, don't go any further. So warning dog owners that they're entering an area where there are nesting and resting shorebirds is really important. And so the dog registration fee must support signage, education and enforcement that is so urgently needed here in Golden Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you for both your written submission, the presentation, the photos, and speaking to us today. So appreciate the time that you've taken.
Thank you, John.
Next up, also on Zoom, we have Lionel Hume on behalf of Federated Farmers. Welcome, Lionel. I will hand over to you. So 5 minutes, I'll ding the little bell at 4.5. If you want to leave some time for questions, do so. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you for your welcome. We should have Pax Leach here too, who's also representing Federated Farmers.
Welcome, Pax.
I'm going to skim over 2 or 3 of the things we covered in our submission, and then Pax is going to talk about dogs, I hope. The first comment is about the increases in fees and charges generally, which tended to be about 10%. Well, the ones I looked at were. We just asked Council to consider the size of these increases in a context where inflation or the CPI for the quarter ending December was 2.2%. And I just looked up the annual CPI ending March, and that's about 2.5. So yeah, the increases are greater, substantially greater than the rate of inflation. The second thing is the environmental incident inspection charges. This is a proposed new charge at cost. Yeah, well, I guess as a blanket statement, we don't like the idea of new charges at all. But for this one, we were a bit uncertain about the justification for it and somewhat uncertain about how it would actually work. And we don't want people to get lumbered with an inspection charge when there's perhaps been a breach of consent due to circumstances outside their control, like, severe weather event, that sort of thing. So we had concerns around those points. The third thing, there's a travel-free fee for council building inspectors, and we quite appreciate that councils reduced the number of locations at which building inspectors are situated to save costs. But we ask that the travel cost for building inspectors be standardised over the district, really, so that those people living in places where there is no longer a district inspector don't have to pay for the savings that the council's been making by doing that. And if we've got Pax online somewhere, he'll talk about dogs.
Pax, welcome. You're on mute. So yeah, flick off mute. We should be right.
Yeah,
go.
Yep, I'm here.
Yep,
I
we can
might
hear
stop my video because I'm really struggling to hear you guys. So
you.
hopefully
Good as
that'll
gold.
help.
Yep. So we can hear you now.
Can you hear me all right?
Hopefully you can hear it. Yep, we can.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to submit here. Just briefly on the dog side of things, we would like to thank you for creating a separate class for working dogs as you have this year. We appreciate that. Appreciate their being seen as a separate beast from the urban dog and the other rural dog. So yeah, thank you for that. We do believe in a user pays system. Believe that the dog registration fees should cover the funding requirements of the dog control activity. We feel a bit sorry for you guys in that I don't know how you figure that out, because it seems that nobody's dog is the problem. We're yet to hear from anybody who has a dog, a problem dog. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where all the costs are. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it's not working dogs. So I'm going to say that my dogs aren't the problem either. In my farming career, the only contact I've ever had with council around dogs is when I pay my dog rego each year. Most farmers haven't seen a dog control officer since the high data days finished. So we believe that working dogs are a minimal cost in the scheme of things. They don't use the dog walking areas and those sorts of things that council is asked to supply, and dog training, dog owner training, all those things that we've just heard of. So yeah, from that point of view, I believe that the registration fee for working dogs should cover the admin, should be an admin fee, and nothing else. And the costs that are needed to cover the dog control program should be gathered from where the problems are. We also asked, in line with a lot of rural areas, because we are such a rural area here in Tasman, or a lot of it is, a lot of rural areas in New Zealand will have a dog registration fee for sort of the first 3 or 5 working dogs on a property, and thereafter have either a reduced or a zero fee, just to recognise how many dogs at home. We've got 9 working dogs. A lot of farmers are very similar to that, and it does add up. And yeah, that's probably it for me, I think, unless Lionel.
You're pretty much at your 5 minutes.
Yep.
Pretty much at the 5 minutes anyway.
Thank you.
There may be one question just in relation to that interesting thing from Federated Farmers, that not supporting fee increases, which are user pays, but at the same time not wanting it in general rate. So Lionel, maybe you could just touch on, because you were quite specific, you didn't support the increases in user pays, including the travel charge for building consents in outlying areas. But I'm thinking if we put our rate increase up by a couple of percent more than we're proposing, you probably have an issue with that as well.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about the travel charge for building inspectors, we quite appreciate that. Yeah, council wants to keep its, well, to manage things effectively and efficiently, and thereby you've decided to not have building inspectors in some locations but have them at others. I guess our point here is that why should those who happen to be in a ward where there's no longer a building inspector situated have to pay a travel charge, even although there's been a cost saving, and it's almost as though there's been a council cost saving, which is they're sort of paying for, I guess, rather than everyone paying for it. Well, they're not getting the benefit of the cost saving.
I understand your point in relation to the travel charge.
Yeah, that's right.
There is one more question to either Pax or Lionel, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. Lionel, I totally see your logic, especially about that charge. What would the impact be if council chose to do less visits and waiting to do several visits in an area at a time? What would be the impact of delaying those inspections on those people receiving it?
Yeah, I must confess I really have no idea about that. I guess it depends how urgently people need an inspection, if work's being held up because of it. I get it would very much depend on specific circumstances, I would imagine. What you're saying sounds logical, as long as there are not big delays built in because of that.
Okay. Thanks, Lionel. Thanks, Pax. Thanks for both of you for both your written submission and appearing today. So appreciate it. And
Thank
lastly, also on Zoom, we have Katie Lavers on behalf of dog owners of Golden Bay. So Katie,
I'm just trying to sort my video out. Hi, can you all see me?
We can, and we can hear you as well.
Thank you. Okay, so I used to be a teacher, and I think you've always sat down for long, so it's a little brain counsellors. You just hold up your thumb, and then imagine.
You might want, Katie, you might want to try turning off your video because we can hear you, but it's quite robot-y, which won't help with your thumb signals, unfortunately.
How's that? Can you hear me?
That's better.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. That's much better.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I just want to pose a rhetorical question to all the councillors. How many dogs do you know whose incisors sit less than the width across the top of your thumbs? Okay, so I just want to say that we have to be very careful looking at evidence and think about, actually you need a saliva test to see if a dog's been on a bird, and everything else is circumstantial. Just want to say that before I start. Cura, okay, the wording in the dog bylaw is clear. It explicitly uses the term minimising risks, not protection. This distinction is really important, and Councillor Greening's previously pointed it out. It highlights the intended scope of the dog regulation. Dogby wonders if the council's approach has gone too far, with a large increase in resources being allocated to staffing for patrolling beaches instead of dogs, that exceeds that which is necessary to simply minimise risks. We think it's unreasonable to expect the council to protect every bird species costs, and that comes from someone who runs a trapline at Milnthorpe myself to help support the oyster catchers and shorebirds. So employing so many staff, if it's for this purpose, we think it's excessive, and it's an inefficient use of ratepayers' money. Ratepayers deserve a balanced and pragmatic approach, not one that prioritises overkill at their expense. If this is the plan for all the extra staff you're employing, can we suggest that resourcing could be far better allocated to addressing more pressing issues? For example, wandering dogs in our suburbs and towns are a genuine concern, and there's a clear need for better education around human-dog interaction. We believe this is where TDC should be focusing its time, energy, discussions, and resources on practical solutions that benefit both the community and dog owners, rather than on measures that miss the mark. A ranger driving from Nelson to Collingwood to stand on an empty beach in the off-season represents a misappropriation of funds, in our opinion. Would you increase charges for habitual nuisance complainants? We would recommend adding a clause charging them for travel and time wasted as a possible way to get extra revenue. The next thing I want to talk about is the Clued Up Kids programme, which contract services used to run. It was dropped last year with no explanation. This was a vital educational course that was run in local schools, and it was for dog safety education for children. We are concerned that the Clued Up Kids programme is now not running, even though the intention is to raise the rates. It seems an important part of the dog control strategy is being dropped. Why would this be? Are you in breach of your own bylaw here? Education, by the way, is a process. Signs and leaflets and pamphlets are only information. The SPCA position statement also aligns with the Clued Up Kids programme. It says current dog control legislation does not effectively support dog control nor encourage safer communities. They advocate for evidence-based dog safety education. Evidence-based dog safety education for both children and adults contributes to safer communities. The dog bylaw is being framed as a conservation regulation, but that's not its true purpose. The bylaw is fundamentally about the health and safety of dogs, owners, and the public. And it's time to adopt a more balanced perspective on the real issues surrounding dog control. We need to address the actual problems at hand rather than allowing the conversation to be dominated by narrow interests with little real evidence. Have you truly considered the social impact of raising rates? 1/3 of households are feeling a growing sense of persecution due to the first draft bylaw of the new dog bylaw, which did not reflect the early engagement at all, and now these rate increases, and we question whether it's justified. Dogs and dog walkers on beaches are not exacerbators of problems. We're 1/3 of ratepayers living our lives. Walking dogs on beaches is an excellent way to live your life, get exercise, be in nature, and socialise with others with a small carbon footprint. We think it would be good to refocus to the issues that matter and will make a difference. While I understand that environmental stewardship is a strategic priority for TDC, it's important to recognise that if people are restricted from interacting with, growing up in and experiencing the environment, they will lose their connection to it. Without that connection, how can we expect them to care about protecting it? True stewardship comes from fostering a sense of belonging and responsibility, not from alienating the very people who are part of that environment. So to summarise what I'm saying, what is TDC's rationale for education in the rates rise? You are beholden to provide that in the bylaw, and the dog education was dropped last year. We recommend you reinstate this as a matter of importance. And we say you can raise the rates, but what will it cost you? Dog owners are rightfully feeling persecuted by TDC's decision making. And finally, with the change of guard and going in-house, will TDC stand by and acknowledge and make decisions based on the evidence collected by the dog control team next time the dog bylaw policy comes up for review? Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Katie, for both your written submission and speaking to it today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I think that concludes all the people we have down to speak. So no, we've passed all the resolutions we need. I think we've passed the resolutions. So that draws us to a conclusion of today's hearings. So I will close with karakia, unless there's any information people would like to ask Emily and or Briley in relation to development contributions, assuming that all of the questions that have been asked within the submissions that have been raised today by questions will be picked up automatically rather than having to go back through and either repeat our questions or repeat points that were made. So that'll be picked up regardless, right? Okay. Right. Please. Development contributions. Okay.
So my key question was just there's been a couple of statements saying that people have asked for a breakdown of costs.
Yes.
And we haven't been able to provide that, which it's a big.
Yes, really there was a general theme through a number of the submissions on both the fees and the DCs around the background information that has driven the dollar figures. So I think, again, I'm assuming that that'll be picked up as we go through. So the dog control one is an interesting one because of the timing around the decision but as much as possible, it should be possible to explain airport fees, development contributions, obviously slightly separate, mooring fees. What are the costs that are driving that fee? How is it allocated? What percentage is either not being covered by general rate anymore, etc. Mike.
Through Ms. Mayor, just to confirm that some areas it's much more difficult to break down fees or costs down to an individual fee versus a fee for the activity that's been, those costs being apportioned off all the fee income. But we'll do our best to provide that more detailed information that supports the fees and charges.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you. I'd just like the loop to be closed with reference to that item of fraud. My suggestion, a suggestion would be to refer the recording to the chair of the Audit and Risk Committee so that a line can be, if appropriate, drawn one way or another.
Okay.
Thank you. So I'm not sure what stage this would be, but today we've identified a few options around dog rego charges and where, if any options were to be considered, at what point information would be provided for that. So I'd be curious on just a couple of those categories that submitters are identified as options, just some very brief analysis around what they might look like, discounts here for this subject or that. At what point that would be provided?
Emily, is that likely to be picked up through the process? Because again, there have been a number of suggestions about discounts, different ways. Was raised about phasing it in over a number of years. Obviously, that has a subsequent impact on on the rates conversation as well, but we're consulting on that currently. So how would that work?
So certainly we've had some discussions with the dog control people about some options around phasing the fee increase in over a period of years. And I guess, you've got two options of either subsidising the cost for a few years at a rate, or creating a deficit in your dog account and paying it off over the subsequent years. So we've asked them to look at that, but we hadn't at this point asked them to look at other kind of options in terms of different fees for working dogs, or the South, for example, that you talked about earlier. We haven't asked them to do anything like that. I don't know how much they can do before we get to the deliberations on that.
Okay, but in terms of, I guess, the higher level conversation, particularly about phasing in and over a longer period and what that creates in terms of a deficit now that's funded. Alternatively, there's obviously the overall cost of the service, which comes down to the annual plan conversation about what level of service are we anticipating providing, which obviously impacts on the fee and then how that's allocated. So can I take it that some options will be and have been considered? And I think it's probably reasonable that we don't expect the council staff to go through all of the proverbial options. So I'm reasonably satisfied that will give us the scope to consider. Gosh. Councillor Kinnermont, Councillor Murray, Councillor Walker.
A very quick question. Do we have to accept all the fees and charges, or can we delay some of them till next year?
So that will be, so that is absolutely an option. You can delay, you can adjust. That's the point of submissions and hearings. However, just so we're all clear, it's not a free lunch. If there's a cost that's being recovered through fees and charges, it's then going to affect your 8.8% rate increase.
But I'm also listening to what Alan's saying, that there could be some more work going on behind the scenes before we've
yes, I'm assuming that based on the submissions, there will already be work done on airport fees, mooring fees. What is the submission suggesting? What are our options? Why is the cost the cost? What is the information that sits behind it? I'm just assuming that's kind of already part of the work. Councillor Murray, then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just clarity again over potential. So I've read it in the submissions about increased levels of service over our dog enforcement. So I think we've talked about it a lot. What if we don't increase? Can we go back to the current level of service? So what's those levers?
Yep. So I guess that, Alan.
That's probably more an annual plan question than a fees and charges question. And potentially, if you make decisions later in the annual plan that changes the level of service and the cost, potentially there might then be a flow-on effect into fees.
Yeah. All right. So conversations about phasing things in, etc., that is slightly independent. The level of service conversation is more of an annual plan discussion that will then be reflected through the fees and charges.
I'll just note that the dog registration fees, so dog registers start from the 1st of July. Under the Dog Control Act, we have to notify the public in the month before we start charging that. So we do need to make those decisions now. They can't be too far down the track.
Okay, well, that's going to be an interesting.
You can delay the fees, but as you say, it's not the fee change. But as you say, there's no free lunch. So we could leave them where they are while further work was done if you want to do that. But you are not getting the revenue that matches the sort of costs while that's happening.
So just clarify for me. So if we didn't approve it pre-1 July, the first because you pay one off, don't you?
Yeah.
So
it starts to run into that problem.
Okay. So effectively,
we have, as Emily said, we do have to notify the fees in the month before we start charging them. So whenever you set the fees, we've got to then notify.
Okay.
In the month before we.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, we'll just have to work with that. That's the way the legislation is structured. Councillor Walker.
Yeah, thanks. Through you, Mayor. Can I get some information around the moorings versus licenses versus who's been covering, and what does these actual changes mean?
Yes,
I can't find it. So clearly I haven't dug.
You've got to go back through the moorings bylaw. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff that leads to that conversation, but that's absolutely something we'll need to be clear back to people, because I'm also not sure. I'm assuming the logic is those coastal permits are going to expire, they will have to apply for a new resource consent and pay the actual cost of the consent application processing, whatever that looks like. Again, that's assumptions I'm making, but we need to be clear.
So how come some people were correspondent with 3
so
moorings, 3 lots, some got none, some got 1 or 2?
That's again assuming a question that was raised in submission, so will be covered in terms of communication and whether we're responsible to write to every single person or whether public notices are the primary purpose of making these, because this is a discussion we have a lot. Are we required to write to every person who's affected by a change? And if we were, that would be bigger than Ben-Hur when you look at all of the changes we make in different areas versus what we notified directly and what we rely on public notification to achieve. So yeah, we'll pick that up as well. All right, is there anything further? If not, I will call the meeting to a close and close with karakia. Kua mutu a mātou mahi mō tēnei wā. Manakitia mātou o mātou hoe o mātou whānau katoa. Ao ki te airangi e tau mai ana. Everybody.